Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe and the like button. We have a great conversation today where we're going to be looking at having an introspective look at Black political ideologies, an examination of strengths, and of course, weaknesses. As you all know, we're in the midterm election season, and many people have been having debates regarding what side of the so-called political aisle are people on. Are they on the left? Are they on the right? And so I think it's great for us to have a conversation, particularly about three of the main Black political ideologies. That is, of course, integrationism, Black nationalism or Pan-Africanism, then of course Black conservatism. We know oftentimes due to the push by some to actually speak ill of Pan-Africanism, many have made arguments about Pan-Africanism, even Black nationalism, that are patently false. And so I think this is a great chance to have that conversation. I hope that I'm not too didactic, of course, in the conversation that we're going to have. But before we get started, you all know we got to go over some ground rules, right? So first and foremost, when we have this conversation, facts over feelings is required at all times. No racial epithets of any kind can be used in referencing Black people, regardless of one's geopolitical location or place of origin. So once again, if you use racial epithets of any kind on my show, on my channel, on my broadcast, I will block you. So make sure you don't do that. Last but not least, if you make a claim that is patently false, I will shut you down. Right? I do not allow misinformation or false information on my channel. Many people argue that we have a right to free speech in America. We understand that, but here at Lumumba Speaks, this is the United States of Lumumba. You can have a differing opinion, but you cannot promote misinformation or false information. Now I would give an example of that for many people. They always, at one moment, many people always ask the question, can you give a difference, right? So a difference of opinion would be, I believe Michael Jordan's the best player ever. And many people may believe LeBron James is the best player ever. I wouldn't have a problem with that, right? The issue would be if one would make an example of why LeBron James is the best player ever because Michael Jordan only won one championship. That would be something that is patently false. And that's something I would take umbrage with and do not allow on my channel. So, but before we get started, I also want to make sure I disseminate to you all today's Black History fact. And today's Black History fact is that 86 years ago today, in Liberty, Texas, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, none other than Bobby Seale, was born on this day 86 years ago. And as we know, Bobby Seale was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, along with Huey P. Newton, also put some respect on his name, Dr. Huey P. Newton. And so many people may be aware that the Black Panther Party was created in 1966, if I remember correctly, in Oakland, California. And it was based off the teachings of Malcolm X. They were inspired by the teachings of Malcolm X. They created the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And as we know, they started off simply monitoring the police, and then they engaged in other social initiatives as well, such as, of course, creating an award-winning independent school. And of course, they even had that breakfast program that led to, of course, the proliferation of free breakfast programs throughout all public and even many will say private education institutions here in the United States. So I want to give a shout out, sending love to our esteemed elder, Bobby Seale, who of course was born on this day 86 years ago, co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And I'm going to put the link in the chat so we could get this party started, or the conversation started, as they say. But I also wanted to mention, I would be remiss in my duty, right, as the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, to not discuss, give me 1 second here, to not discuss visiting my website. One moment, that's not working here. Let's see how this is going to go here. I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't mention the website, my website, LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Go to the website, check it out, reclaim who you are by always betting on Black. Find out a little bit about myself. Of course, more than just a kid from Dayton, I've been a proud Pan-Africanist scholar, lecturer, and speaker at a very early age. But even more so, would love for you all to definitely take a look at some of my recent publications, my two recent publications entitled Why I'm Critical of Critical Theory, and of course, looking at Travis Hunter and the move towards Black Power, where I take a look at, I examine the top football prospects' audacious flip from a major NCAA football program to an HBCU, its historical antecedents, and how it may be a catalyst for future empowerment for Black people. And definitely, if you are interested in having me come speak, do not be shy, particularly on issues of Black empowerment. We're talking about, even more importantly, focusing on issues with Black youth. Oftentimes Black youth feel as if they're being overlooked, they're being bypassed, or that there aren't particular opportunities available for them. And we work on that, looking at some of the nuanced ways that they can have a successful future, as well as not turning to oftentimes some of the traps or tricks of the enemy to try to engage in being able to have a livelihood. So with that being said, we're going to get into it, an introspective look at Black political ideologies, an examination of their strengths and weaknesses. So for many of you who may be unaware, for those of you who are aware, in African-American intellectual thought, there are three major political ideologies, right? That is integrationalism, Black nationalism, and of course, Black conservatism. Typically, a person's orientation towards one of these three ideologies is determined by one's perspective on America. That is, whether he or she believes that Blacks will soon be included in the mainstream of American life on par with whites. When Blacks have been optimistic about America, believing that they tend to have been integrationists, have minimized their nationalist tendencies. On the other hand, despair about America, believing that genuine equality is impossible because whites have no moral conscience or any intention to apply laws fairly, has always been the seedbed, of course, of nationalism. So one of the things that we find, and this, of course, Dr. Amos Wilson mentions this in his seminal text, Blueprint for Black Power, is this concept and idea that Black people historically, when things are going well, are integrationist in nature. And then when we have some type of racial retrenchment that we've had several times, of course, in our history, they tend to have a more Black nationalist or Pan-Africanist frame of reference. So as you can see here, we're looking at integrationalism. I have a picture of three prominent African-American integrationists, one Frederick Douglass, the second is Asa Philip Randolph, who of course was the progenitor of the first Black Union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Maids. Then last but not least, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we know we can't mention Dr. King without mentioning Coretta Scott King. But when we look at integrationalism, many integrationist thinkers have defined the question of double consciousness, right? W.B. Du Bois. Let me go back real quick. W.B. Du Bois asked the question. He stated the dilemma that slavery and segregation created for Africans in the United States as sharply and poignantly as W.B. Du Bois, right? In his classic statement of the problem, he spoke of it as a peculiar sensation, a double consciousness, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideas, and one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The two-ness that Du Bois was describing stemmed from being African in America. Many people would even argue Black in America. To me, it's semantics, but we use the term African. Here then is the dilemma that he wrote. What after all am I? Am I an American or am I a Negro? Can I be both? And of course, this is one of the opening statements in his seminal text, Souls of Black Folk, that was written 119 years ago today. Souls of Black Folk. It was published in 1903. So when we go to integrationalism, the question that's being asked is, many integrationists argue, yes, you can be African, you can be Black, and you can be an American. They believe that it is possible to achieve justice in the United States and create wholesome relations with the white community or power structure. The integrationist line of thought goes something like this. And I'm getting this information, of course, from Dr. James Cone's book, Malcolm and Martin in America, A Dream or a Nightmare. Many people may be unaware, but Dr. Cone, in his book, when he describes, of course, Dr. King's and, of course, El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X's political ideology and how they viewed America and even the world, he gives a historiographic overview of African-American intellectual thought as the introduction to the book. So this is where this information is coming from. If you are interested in actually reviewing that information, I even may have the book behind me here. I'll look rather quickly. Oh, and I do. Here we go, right here. Martin and Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by Dr. James Cone. So just want to put that out there. But so then the question comes, integrationist line of thought goes something like this. If whites really believe their political and religious documents, then they know that Black people should not be enslaved and segregated, but rather integrated into the mainstream of society. Integrationist type organizations, individuals tend to be protest oriented. They practice the use of moral persuasion, and they typically advocate for lessening the importance of race, right? Usually advocate nonviolence, typically Christian based. Many believe God will fight the battle, and they tend to rely heavily on white philanthropic support. The weakness that I find in all of these values are focusing on whites to change their behavior to resolve the issue of racial discrimination and oppression can negate one's sense of agency and self-determination. So I've always made the argument that I believe that for many of our people, we have tended to take on a mantra, right, an ethos of believing that others or even the supernatural would do for us what we should do for ourselves. And I think much of that comes from, of course, how we're being miseducated. Shout out to Dr. Carter G. Woodson. But I think much of that comes due to how we're being miseducated. And as a result, typically the education that we receive, our children receive, and of course, even previous generations receive, have taught us that whenever something good has happened for us, right, it emphasizes the largesse of whites rather than the agency and self-determination of our ancestors and our people. So that's just something to keep in mind. So then we're going to turn into, of course, Black nationalism. So as we can see, three of probably the greatest Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists that ever lived. One, Martin Delany, who is considered the father of Black nationalism. Of course, one, Marcus Garvey. Then last but not least, one, Malcolm X. And as you can see, the books here I have is, of course, Classical Black Nationalism from the American Revolution to Marcus Garvey, edited by William Jeremiah Moses. Then, of course, Modern Black Nationalism from Marcus Garvey to Louis Farrakhan, edited by William L. Vandenberg, right? So Black nationalism, nationalist thinkers have rejected the American side of their identity and affirmed the African side. Ashe, Black power, saying, no, we cannot be both. They have contended that 244 years of slavery, followed by legal segregation, social degradation, political disenfranchisement, and economic exploitation means that Blacks will never be recognized as human beings in white society. For those of you who may be unaware, oftentimes when we talk about Black nationalism or Pan-Africanism, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out about the roots, of course, of Black nationalism, but there's a litany of scholarly literature on the subject. Typically, you could read John Blassingame's The Slave Community. You could read Stodum Stuckey's book, Slave Culture. You could read numerous texts on African cultural retention and American culture, African American culture. So there's a litany of texts that actually touches on this. But the roots of Black nationalism go back to 17th century slave conspiracies, when Africans longing for their homeland banded together in a common struggle against slavery because they knew that they were not created for servitude. So the roots of Black nationalism actually find roots in, of course, slave revolts. And so some of the core values of Black nationalism are racial pride, unity as a people, embracing one's African heritage, right? Self-defense, political and economic self-determination. I think that's very important because many people would argue that this whole concept of economic self-determination is rooted in, of course, being a conservative, right? So definitely got to touch on that. And I'm quite sure Marcus Garvey would disagree with that. And the advocate of creating autonomous institutions rooted in our own history, heritage, and culture. But one of the weaknesses of Black nationalism is verbal militancy, right? We know oftentimes Black nationalists tend to speak truth to power, but verbal militancy without action leads to passive non-resistance to oppression. This is one of the things that Dr. Amos Wilson touches on in his seminal text, Blueprint for Black Power. In fact, I would implore all of you, if you purchase the book, the last chapter, I believe chapter 31, touches on the crisis in leadership in the Black community. And this is one of the things that he mentions in terms of the crisis in leadership, particularly from a Black nationalist perspective or cultural nationalist perspective. It's this reliance on verbal militancy. And as we know, the African proverb teaches us that talking does not, I repeat, does not fill a breadbasket. And then last but not least, we're going to look at Black conservatism, right? We see, of course, the most famous Black conservative of all time, one, Booker T. Washington. Then we have, of course, George Schroyer there. And then, of course, one of the more recent Black conservatives, Herman Cain, a former presidential candidate. And so, of course, I have both of these books here, Rediscovering Black Conservatism, and of course, Saviors or Sellouts. I've read both of these books, great books if you want to learn about the roots of Black conservatism and, of course, what those values are. So Black conservatism, as many people may be unaware, has a long history and includes a large number of prominent African Americans. Nevertheless, it has never become a salient ideology for a significant number of the African American community. Jupiter Hammond during the slave period, William Hooper Council during the First Nadir, George Schroyer during the 1940s and 50s, as well as A.G. Gaston during the 1960s, have all been, of course, prominent adherents of Black conservatism. Some of the core values of Black conservatism is advocacy and adherence to white American cultural values, a strong belief in individualism, promoting a colorblind individual incorporation into the U.S. political economy, polity, and mainstream white civil society. Of course, there's a belief in self-help, pulling oneself up by their own bootstrap. When this is a major issue, there's oftentimes a denial of historical and continuing practice of racial oppression. This makes me think of the Black conservative who wrote the book Stupid Black Man, Dumb Black Man, something like that, how playing the race card, of course, causes you to lose. I'm paraphrasing the title, but this is one of the things that he talks about, right? There's a denial in the book, there's a denial of historical and continuing practice of racial oppression. Then, of course, unfortunately, for many Black conservatives, there is a belief that African American culture is a composite of pathological behaviors, i.e., poverty, fatherlessness, and violence. I say that one more time. This is one of the major values of Black conservatism that turns many African Americans off, turns them away from Black conservatism, is this belief that African American culture is a composite of pathological behaviors, i.e., poverty, fatherlessness, and violence. The major weakness I find is strong identification and allegiance to the white power structure leads many to view Black conservatives as Uncle Toms, thus limiting its ability to appeal to the majority of the African American community. I will say that one more time, that one of the major weakness I find, where will Black Marxism, communism fit in the spectrum? Appreciate that, brother. I'm gonna need you to tap in and be part of the conversation. And we could get to that. Trigger Happy 262 asked the question, what would Black Marxism, communism fit in this spectrum? Tap in, be part of the conversation, and we're going to get to that question because the link is in the chat. But the major weakness for Black conservatives is a strong identification and allegiance to the white power structure. Of course, this causes many to view Black conservatism as Black conservatives as Uncle Toms, thus limiting its ability to appeal to the majority of African American community. Where is this slide from? Ghost, but actually this is a slide I created myself. So I did a presentation on Black political ideologies. And of course, this is a slide that I put together myself. So tap in, be part of the conversation. The link is in the chat. I'm gonna put the link in the chat again. Then we can have a conversation about what information you may agree, disagree, what you learned. And of course, in terms of many of the individuals who are in our community and advocating, we can even have a conversation about where do you believe many people fall on that spectrum of integrationalism, Black nationalism, and of course, Black conservatism. So the link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. I would love to have a robust conversation regarding an examination of Black political ideologies, and of course, an introspective look at the strengths and weaknesses of all three. And do you all believe that there should be a marrying of those three approaches? So definitely want to have that conversation. As I said it before, the link is in the chat. The link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. As you know, you do not have to cam up. You do not have to cam up. You can even use a pseudonym if necessary. If you don't want to put yourself out there, you may have a public-facing job in which discussing these issues may be taboo, right? We know oftentimes, unfortunately, they say that there's freedom. We have freedom of speech, but we know we don't have freedom of consequences. So definitely understand if you all find that unbecoming, but you can definitely tap in, use a pseudonym, and then of course, you don't have to cam up, and we could take part in a robust conversation. Brother Ghost, what have you?
Hey, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing quite all right, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Very good. Talk to me.
Yeah, I'm just kind of tapping in. I was actually watching some other stream that was kind of related to the same thing, so I was kind of watching that, but just decided to tap in. So I didn't catch everything that you said. I just kind of saw the slide there.
Okay.
So what's kind of the question that you were asking?
Right. So, of course, I went over the three prominent Black political ideologies in Black America: integrationalism, Black nationalism, then, of course, Black conservatism. And I'm going to say this. I got to put a pin in this, but I'm even going to do one on Black feminism, and then, of course, Africana womanism. So I think that would be a great actual conversation for us to have, when people can actually sit down, look at the facts and not the hype. Then hopefully we can even get some sisters in to have a conversation about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You.
So, but particularly, I think what was important was to look at the origins of these ideologies. What are some of the core values? Then what are some of the major weaknesses that all three ideologies present?
Okay, got you.
So what I could do is I can pull it back up, and then you could take a look at that. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I just kind of want to get an idea of, what's the question sort of that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So as you can see, Black conservatism here, take a look at the bullet points in terms of the core values, and then, of course, the weakness that we find in Black conservatism. And then, of course, you let me know when you review that, and I will go back to Black nationalism.
Okay, yeah, just give me a second. I got to make it a little bigger. It's kind of
no problem.
Small, but...
All right.
Yeah, this one is funny, but yeah, okay, I'll review that one.
All right, cool. So then we're gonna go to Black nationalism.
Okay, yeah, got it.
All right. And then last but not least, we're going to hit integrationalism.
Okay, got it.
Gotcha. So what are your thoughts?
Interesting. One quick question. So is this popular weaknesses and strengths based on what you see in the general public, or are these your views on the weaknesses?
No. So you must have came in later. So this comes from, of course, this book here, Martin and Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by Dr. James Cone. In the opening, he gives a overview of Black nationalism and, of course, integrationalism. He gives a intellectual history of it in the book, in the introduction. He talks about all of these different issues, the values, how the values developed, and then, of course, what the weaknesses are. So this isn't based on my personal perspective. This is based on scholarship.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yes.
He was like a psychologist or something, right? Or
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to pull up all of the information I got this. Oh, yeah, here we go. So here we go. I'm gonna share the screen one more time, and you can actually maybe screenshot a picture of all the books that I actually read to review this information and put this information together. So all of these books here were used for that. So we're talking about Malcolm X Speaks, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, Blueprint for Black Power, The Black Jacobins, Psychology of Blacks, Hard Road to Freedom, Story of African American History, Volume 1. So all of these books were used in terms for presentation that I showed you just a piece of.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, man, I mean, my thoughts on those different ones. Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm not trying to say that, anything that I read there quickly was like inaccurate or anything. I was just wondering kind of where it comes from so I can kind of understand the perspective that
Gotcha.
it's coming from. But yeah, no, I mean, some of those things definitely seem to be valid assessments. It's some, I mean, with the conservatism one, and just to be clear, like I said on the last time that I joined one of your lives, I'm just more so like what is best for Black people. Pretty much
Yeah.
that's my perspective. I'll vote anyway. I don't really we can get into it, but I don't really feel too. I think I said this. I don't feel too confident that a lot of things are really going to help Black people that much anyway. So,
Okay.
so I kind of evaluate it on a case by case basis. Um, but yeah, no, I thought that the Black conservative one was pretty critical. Although I would agree that some of that does apply to a lot of people, especially some of the modern people that you see today.
Mhm.
Um, so so yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, I mean. Yeah, like I said, I mean, my opinion pretty much is just that, yeah, we should just really evaluate all these different ideologies, individual politicians' platforms, public sentiment, like what people are saying. We should just really evaluate all of it from like, okay, is this gonna help Black people? And like, is also another thing is like, are you even what are you like? Are you a pro-Black? Like, what is your individual thing? And then are the people that you're voting for, that you're championing, even if they're just regular people? These days we have internet celebrities and whatnot.
Mhm.
So are these people really aligned with what it is that you say that you want?
Right.
Yeah.
And are you asking me personally, or is that a rhetorical question?
No, no, no. I'm saying it's I wouldn't even say, I don't know if it's more of just a question to ask people. Yeah,
Right.
I guess I'm not asking you personally, and I don't know if it's a rhetorical question in the sense that I have the answer for everybody. I'm just saying it's a question that you should ask yourself.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because we went over the values and then we looked at oftentimes what I consider to be weaknesses. Do you think that the weaknesses were accurate for each ideological worldview?
They could be. They could be. I think that you're just the same as everybody else in the sense. I mean, you're more well read and so on and so forth, and developing those opinions and views. But for all we can really do is go off of what we see. So I
Mhm.
think, yeah, in that sense, yeah, they're definitely accurate from just briefly reading over it. But one thing I would say is some of these ideologies can overlap, and I think in a lot of cases they probably do overlap. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like,
This is true.
because yeah, because at the end of the day, like, first of all, this is all underneath somebody else's system. I was just commenting that on this other stream I was on, and basically it was a pretty similar discussion. Basically, it wasn't so much about politics, but more so about like what can we do to kind of liberate ourselves, whether we should do it here or elsewhere, how should we do it, can we do it, etc. So what I'm saying is basically that we're all doing all of these philosophies are basically under somebody else's system. The Black nationalists, to get in further detail, the Black nationalists, regardless of what organization they're in, for the most part, it's like they're talking about a system that is in America.
Mhm.
They want to build a system within a system. They want sovereignty within a nation where they don't have sovereignty legally. So it's kind of like I kind of feel like it's at the very least it's an interesting way of doing things, and there's probably a lot of faults to it, flaws that you can kind of point out pretty easily if you're being objective and looking at it that way. And one of your critiques was that action, your bottom critique that you had at there, the weakness is you could get stuck in basically non-action, and you're kind of just um, not progressing. If
Yeah,
that makes
verbal
sense.
militancy without action leads to passive non-resistance to oppression. So that tends
Right.
to be a major issue. because we know the African American proverb "speak truth to power." But as we all know, the African proverb states, "What talking doesn't fill the bread basket." So I think that's a major issue. I think also oftentimes we tend to find our people are verbally militant because it's not much else that they were able to do other than talk a good game. Be Jim Lampley or Larry Merchant, just talk a good fight, right? So I think that was one of the major issues as well. I'm going to address the question by Trigger Happy 262 Plus. Ask the question, where would Black Marxism or communism fit in this spectrum? That is a great question. I think that it's a bit nuanced. Oftentimes people think of the Black Panther Party because they were Black Marxists, but they weren't Black nationalists. But I would argue that they were more so integrationists, right? Because they believed in working with white people, white groups, so on and so forth. And then we even know in Pan-Africanism, you typically have two kinds of Pan-Africanists. You have the Pan-African nationalists, who was more so along the Garvey side of things, and then you have the Pan-African Marxists, one Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, that believes that the major inhibitor of Black progress is not so much so racism, but what capitalism. So shout out to brother Trigger Happy 262 for asking that question. But Abi Kwalan, you got to tap in and be part of the conversation, brother, because I got some questions for you. So tap in, be part of the conversation. Link is in the chat. We're having a robust conversation regarding an introspective look at Black political ideologies, an examination of strengths, and of course, weaknesses. And of course, we've reviewed integrationalism, Black nationalism, and of course, Black conservatism. So let me ask you all this question. So what we tend to find today when we look at Black conservatives, Larry Elder, Candace Owens, you name them, right, is this idea of there being a denial of historical and even contemporary racial oppression. What are you all's thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with that one. Although, like I said, some of the things on there were kind of, they seem critical, but I would say that that is a factual statement. I mean, obviously, the most prominent people. Now, of course, we can have another conversation of why are these the most prominent people? Why are these being presented as the ones that are in front of the camera the most? But yeah, as far as the main ones, that we know that has been long a critique, and it's still an issue. Although it seems like at least the general public and what you see on social media, it seems like people are ignoring that a lot more than what they used to in the past. Like if you remember, of course, well, I'm sure you are well aware of this personally, but like Ben Carson, right? He
Mm-hmm.
used to be like criticized heavily, even when Colin Powell, was kind of affiliated with these people. It was like, oh, he's like a sellout or this or that. Condoleezza Rice, people like that.
Well, I
But
don't
now,
remember too many people being harder, on Colin Powell because he had a history in which he was, in the military, and most people in the military tend to vote Republican because Republicans are willing to have a larger military budget and they get more money. You get paid more money. Even with Condoleezza Rice, so two things I can recall. One, Condoleezza Rice really came under a lot of criticism when she was found shopping for shoes in a boutique in Midtown Manhattan after 9/11 took place. And then the other was people did unfortunately refer to her sometimes as a bed wench and insinuate that she was having, of course, sexual relations with then President Bush. So those are some issues. But I think what we tend to find, one, you mentioned that some of the values that I listed were a bit critical. Could you expound on that?
I would just let me read through and see if I can point out something here. 1 second. I'm just saying it seemed to come from like I guess a critical perspective, which I'm not disagreeing with. I'm just saying. But let me. I'm trying to look at this. Like I said, writing's a little small, but let me read through. Yeah, I mean, it's just advocacy and adherence to white American cultural values. I mean, again, I'm not disputing it. I believe it's true, but I'm just saying it kind of comes from like, that's why I wanted to get some
Well,
insight. But I get what you're saying.
and the thing is, if you read the literature, potentially in terms of the history of Black conservatism, and definitely when you look at even contemporary Black conservatives, this is something that they advocate. So, I mean, this is coming from the scholarship. I mean, I have the books right here in front of me. So here's one. think it's a sellout. I don't know what the other one is. I'll find it. But this is just what they advocate. I mean, it's not, I mean, it might sound critical, but it's just, if there was no oppression, they wouldn't have a platform. Their actual platform is the denial of oppression, is a fake out game they play. Oh, understood? Bag says, when they downplay race in America, they do this to be accepted in the conservative party. I would agree with that sentiment. So this is just something that we find that there typically is a denial of historical and even continuing practice of racial oppression. I mean, we see people, of course, Candace Owens has a documentary out where she's stating that George Floyd was not killed due to police violence. So, I mean, we all watch the videos, right? So these are the type of things that take place. They typically do this to ingratiate themselves with the white conservative power structure. And at the same time, we know that oftentimes Black liberals or integrationists tend to have talking points to ingratiate themselves with the white power structure on the left as well. So that's just something to, you know, consider. But once again, part of the major issue is that these are just the facts, right? One of the things that Black conservatism has in common with, of course, Black nationalism is the concept and idea of self-help, this idea of economic agency, right? But yeah, for the most part, you know, they kind of are tethered to white conservative values and talking points and even views. And many people argue, particularly in the book Rediscovering Black Conservatives, they talk about how what we're finding now are inorganic Black conservatives. These are individuals who are being oftentimes sought out while they're in college, given a paid and developed and oftentimes trained by right-wing think tanks, and then given a platform to, of course, disseminate their oftentimes incendiary rhetoric of African Americans as a pathological people. So, and in fact, if you want to be honest, typically when you hear a Black conservative talk, they only speak ill of Black people, period. And the greatest example of that, of course, is Candace Owens. I mean, no matter what's going on in the world, she would find a way to tie that into Black people. I think there was a situation in China where China was encroaching on international waters and trying to make a claim to them. And she said, well, see, this is going on, and all Black people care about is Juneteenth. All Black people care about is Juneteenth. So we see, once again, this is adherence to, of course, not only white conservative values, which we can oftentimes argue is rooted in anti-Blackness, but also a belief that African-American culture is a composite of pathological behavior. So with that said, I know we got some more people here in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. The link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. We'd love to get you all's viewpoints as well, particularly we out in bag 761. Harris Faulkner on Fox News is another person that has energy for Black people, but not for whites. That would be another great example, right? I think another issue we could take a look at is this whole idea of when we talk about Black nationalism, and oftentimes people take umbrage with Black people engaging in maybe a capitalistic pursuit of wealth, right? And many people take umbrage with that. We know oftentimes we hear the concept and idea of what a poor righteous teacher. And I would argue that Marcus Garvey would take extreme he would find that extremely problematic, right? We know Marcus Garvey was someone who believed in not only industry, but believed in trying to control industry in order to have the wealth necessary to help Black people gain power. So what are you all thoughts, particularly in terms of Black nationalism, the core values of Black nationalism? What are you all thoughts about that? Brother B. Laquan got a lot of static in the background. Brother Ghost, what are your thoughts?
On Black nationalism specifically?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, these ones, I would agree with most of these points, both the strengths and the weaknesses, I guess. Yeah, my overall thoughts on it as far as like a movement to liberate us, I mean, the crazy thing is, I would say it has been maybe the most effective. Like, you know, if you're talking about, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to quantify it. I will say I'm not, you know, it's not like I've sat down and really looked at it, but, you know, it seems like, and just jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like, although I'm more of I think Pan-Africanism is the best solution. I mean, really, if we look at it, it's like, has Black nationalism, because a lot of people are not going to follow Pan-Africanism, or they don't understand how to follow it. It seems like Black nationalism has maybe been the most effective.
And of course, Pan-Africanism is Black nationalism on a global level. So
Right.
when we talk about Black nationalism, this is pertaining to Black people in your own country. Pan-Africanism is Black nationalism pertaining to Black people throughout the world, right? So
yeah,
that's the easiest way of describing the difference between Pan-Africanism and the Black nationalism. And when I have conversations with many people who adhere to the FBA mantra or mindset, I make them aware that you're advocating Black nationalism. They have no idea, right? And so part of this is unfortunate because oftentimes we have individuals who take on political ideals, but they don't understand the values behind them or how they even originated, right? And so I think that's an issue as well. But I would even argue that foundation of the FBA mantra even takes on concepts of Black conservatism and even, of course, Black integrationalism. In terms of conservatism, we find this concept of a xenophobia, right? We know most conservatives are extremely xenophobic, right? They don't want to alter the American the American palette, right, in terms of the racial configuration. And then we know oftentimes integrationists are individuals who adhere and advocate that, they are first and foremost above anything American, which is something that we know Frederick Douglass did as well. Yes.
I can't hear nothing.
What's the word, brother? Hope you can hear us. You can tap in whenever necessary. And so, of course, we're going to look at integrationalism, right? And so we got the values, and of course, what are your thoughts about that as well? And this goes, of course, for everyone who's online now in the chat as well. So tap in. Like I say, the link is in the chat. I will put the link in the chat one more time and we can have a conversation. But I think it's important because I think a person's ideology, in my opinion, should be a harbinger of that person's goals and, of course, their behavior, right? But I think oftentimes people find themselves to where they're nebulous in terms of where they stand politically. And unfortunately, as a result, we tend to find individuals who are kind of all over the place, all over the map. And then we kind of wonder why is there inconsistency with what the person is saying, that they're articulating one viewpoint maybe in 2020, then something else in 2022. I think it's because of the lack of course, consistency and a thorough understanding of where they align themselves politically from an ideological standpoint.
Okay, now I can hear.
Yes.
I can hear you now. Peace, brother. Peace to the panel. I was having a little bit of phone difficulties, but I'm good now.
No problem.
And I think I missed some of the conversation, but last I heard, you guys were talking about Black nationalism.
Yes, sir. So yeah, you can share your perspective. I don't know if you got to see, the presentation that I gave in terms of the core values of each of the three, and then of course the weaknesses that or critiques I have of all three as well.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of it, but I believe that the answer is Pan-Africanism and African nationalism.
Okay.
Yeah, but I feel like whenever we say Black, most people tend to think about just America or just wherever the location that they're currently at. And I think that we have to think about this issue as a global issue.
This is true. This is true. But I just thought it was important to have this conversation about these different ideologies, because we tend to find, and I would just make, in my opinion, a situation in which individuals are kind of all over the place. Right. And then, as you know, I think you put up a tweet where you made
going viral right now.
Some rather strong claims. And I think we do find some individuals, and this is something that I do know because I've met individuals before, particularly when I was an undergraduate, who masqueraded as Black nationalists or Pan-Africanists, but they were actually Black conservatives.
Exactly.
But I also think there's a situation in which someone could be an advocate for Black capitalism and be a Black nationalist or a Pan-Africanist. And I think the greatest example of that would be one of Marcus Garvey.
And that was my question.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Do you think Marcus Garvey was a black capitalist? Because I've been seeing like a lot of like information being spread out here that capitalism is going to save black people. That is actually the key, not socialism. And I personally believe that none of these ideologies, these European ideologies, is actually going to help us. We need African solutions to African problems, not European solutions.
So, and I like that, Africa for the African. So here's the thing. I would say this. So Marcus Garvey was a man who believed in industry. He believed that in order to gain power, we would need to build wealth, because when you try to build, when you're going to war with white supremacy, you're going to need a large war chest. And so I think he understands that. As someone who was in the military, I know that if you're going to go to war, you're going to need money to finance that war. It was irrespective of what kind of war we're talking about, right? And so I believe that Garvey knew that. And so he understood that, listen, we need to build wealth, right? We can't depend on white people to create jobs for us. We can't depend on white people to create industries for us. And so we have to do these. Peace to the chat, brother. Design is in. Appreciate you, brother. And so I think he understood that, and that's why he took on that issue, because we know that oftentimes, unfortunately, no one was looking to actually create industry and control industry for black people. It was us protesting and pleading for jobs from the power structure.
Right. So you do believe that capitalism is the solution to our problems?
No. So what I would say is I believe controlling industry is part of a solution to our problem. So, for example, I would give an example, and you, I'm sure you know about this as much as I do because you are Pan-Africanist. But we look at what took place in the Congo with Patrice Lumumba.
Yep.
Part of the major reason he was killed was because he was trying to control industry, but typically the exportation of natural resources.
Exactly.
Right. So I understand the importance of controlling industry, because industry equates to a livelihood, and livelihood equates to a quality of life. And one of the issues that we find for our people, irrespective of where we are in the world, is our quality of life tends to be at the bottom of the barrel in terms of every racial ethnic group in the world.
Correct. So how do you think we balance it? Because I don't personally believe that 100% black capitalism is going to save Africa, especially not Africa, because Africa is so, So what do you?
I think that's a great question, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I think if you look at Garvey, he had a perfect blend of not only of capitalism or industry building, but also of organizing, political agitation, right, in nation building. So that was the capitalism and the industry building from Garvey was just one aspect of what the UNIA. It wasn't the overarching goal.
Exactly.
The aspect of, because the reality of the situation is, I don't know if anyone on the panel has children, but I do. We have to, part of doing a good job as a parent is preparing your child to be able to make a living.
I agree.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? So
and I feel like another key thing was Marcus Garvey literally died broke too, though. So I don't think what he was practicing was actually capitalism. You know what I mean? Because he wasn't hoarding the wealth. He was literally.
He wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't. And that's why I use the term industry building.
I like
industry, because oftentimes we think of capitalism, and this is really how it works. It's about one person creating something, others are working on them, and there's a pyramid scheme. But we know that even when the UNIA was at its height, Garvey was not someone who was living high off the hog and actually living off the the proceeds that the UNIA was receiving. Brother Bag 61676 first. What's the word?
How you doing, Professor Lumumba?
Doing quite all right. How are you?
Good. On your topics, it's quite interesting. Me, I would consider myself more of a black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, but being in the United States and never been in Africa, it makes me wonder why we haven't built anything here yet in America.
Well, I would say, one, we have, and that whenever there has been real or perceived black progress in America, has always been followed by a period of racial retrenchment. So whenever we've built something, white people would come and destroy it.
Okay, but that was in the past. Now we have more educated people. We make more money. We even have people that can work from home. So to me, we're in a perfect situation to build another Black Wall Street. And now with the internet the way it is, the way information gets out as quickly, I think it would be harder for them to destroy it.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know about that.
I disagree.
I mean, we still in their country, B. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think that's a great point. Anyone want to respond to Brother Bag's statement?
Yeah, I don't really see us building nothing that's actually going to be for the liberation of Black people. That's 100% independent in America without us having a base outside of America that can protect us, you know, or be able to do trades with. Because I don't see them allowing Black people to create a system underneath their system. And they're powerful because they're oppressing you. So I don't see them allowing that. That's literally suicide attempt. And I feel like us just trying to focus in America and trying to build in America is going to be 10 times difficult if we're not connected globally, you know, and building international relationships. I feel like that's key. We must build international relationships.
Brother Ghost, you said, go ahead, Brother Bag. Go ahead.
But it is possible to build within their system. I mean, people do it all the time. The Mexicans have done it. Asians have done it. We have not built that since what, Garvey? Maybe Black Wall Street. So why is it that we're not able to replicate that and build just like these other minorities? They have their own towns. They have their own industries within their communities.
Right.
So I see
enclave. So I would say this. I think we do. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit, right? So we do know that if you go to any Black community, they tend to be local mom and pop organizations. I mean, businesses, right? There are numerous Black-owned businesses where I'm from, right? We know oftentimes, even in many Black communities, we are the predominant population on a particular side of town, right? And on that particular side of town, we have numerous businesses. If it's laundry, it might be a small little grocery store, so on and so forth. So it's something that's happened, but it hasn't happened in the manner in terms of the dollars that's being distributed in the way it did during yesteryear. But we also have to know that part of the reason why when we had those Black Wall Streets, and of course North Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, so on and so forth, was because of segregation, and we were only allowed to buy, sell, and
right.
our own.
I was just going to mention that. And also, we cannot forget all these other groups that have nations outside of America that backs them up. And they also get help. Because America works with every other group besides Black African people. So they,
Could you give an example of that?
For example, the Asian community. Like the Asian community, they get help from America also. They do deals with them. They invest into them. That's the reason why China is a superpower that it is right now. Because they do trades with America. America helps them. America was investing into China. America comes to Africa and explodes African people. And all these other nations, for example, like the Chinese people, they have a nation outside of America that's backing them up. They have a nation that's protecting them. As Black people in America, we really don't. We don't have nobody that's protecting us or that's looking out for our best interests. And also, Black Americans are about, 13% or 14% of the population?
Yeah.
So it's like I feel like the key thing is building international relationships. We have to build international relationships.
Understood. Hey, make sure you all hit the subscribe and like button. We're having a robust conversation regarding Black political ideologies. We're examining the strengths and the weaknesses, particularly the main three, that is integrationalism, Black nationalism, and of course, Black conservatism. And we are also going to do a talk on Black feminism versus Africana womanism. So definitely need the sisters to tap in for that conversation. Definitely want to have the sisters tap in for that conversation. Make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Brother Ghost, you put some comments in the chat. Could you elaborate on what you put in the chat?
Yeah, the same thing that we actually, me and Bag, were kind of going back and forth with, real quick on the last time that I was on here. I mean, look, my opinion, but I believe it's facts too. I mean, we're not going to be allowed to build anything here. We're not going to be able to build a system within a system. We're not going to be able to be sovereign within a sovereign nation. There's no way to do that. And I can, break it down in further detail. But we're just not going to be able to really do it. Now, what we can do, like he said, and what I put in the chat, we can build up to a certain point. Okay, we can, start saving our money, educate ourselves, become more financially literate, basically do a lot of the things that, and I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam, I'm not Muslim, anything like that, but I'm just saying we can follow those, some of those principles, do things like that. on an individual basis.
What principles are you speaking of?
A lot of the things that they do, practice, what's the way to say it? But eating in a way that is not killing us.
Okay.
Group economics, things like that. Again, I'm not advocating or saying anything about the organization itself.
I'm just
Yeah.
The reason why I ask is because I prefer for people to be very specific. So
Okay.
if they advocate group economics, could you give an example, right? They advocate eating healthy, give an example, right? So typically what they argue is eat healthy. The Nation of Islam typically has taught that you should only eat one time a day. Eating 3 times a day is unnecessary. Part of that came from the fact that the Nation of Islam was created during the Great Depression, right? So it's about saving money. If you want to look at some of the social, political, and economic context that led to that type of thought process and being taught. But I would argue, and you can defer with me if you want, that the Nation of Islam, I think on the surface, many people would say, oh, this sounds good, but the reality is it really isn't. So I would give an example. We talk about group economics, so on and so forth. We know this is one of the fourth principle of Kwanzaa, Ujamaa. But what we tend to find, yes, eat to live is what Sister's talking about. What we tend to find in the Nation of Islam, and this is actually fact, is so we see brothers and sisters on the corner selling a newspaper, right? However, what people don't know is that they have to purchase those newspapers, and that when they're selling them, they're trying to make their money back. And that's on top of them already having to, give a certain amount of their paycheck every week to the nation, right? And so we also know that in the Nation of Islam, they have a certain number of businesses. They have, Muhammad's farms, so on and so forth, right? However, what most people don't know is that they're donating money for these businesses. They are providing the capital for these businesses to exist, but they don't receive a quarterly or annual dividend from the profits of the business, right? So once again, the devil is in the details. So as a result of being an organization and contributing to these robust businesses that the Nation of Islam has, you don't actually benefit from actually providing the capital or investing the capital to allow these businesses to have been created. Last but not least, we know the Nation of Islam owns a lot of property. In those properties, Minister Farrakhan's family members live in those properties. They live rent-free, and the Nation of Islam pays for all their expenses. And many of the individuals aren't even members of the nation, right? So once again, we can see that oftentimes the people, the soldiers, the foot soldiers are actually, unfortunately, finding themselves in a situation where they are being taken advantage of financially. So on the surface, it looks good, right? But when you actually interrogate, the devil's in the details, and we find that it's not what it seems to be. This is one of the reasons why the leadership, the brain trust of the Nation of Islam, that were, of course, part of Elijah Muhammad's advisors, took umbrage with Malcolm X and wanted to have him removed from the Nation of Islam, because they knew that when Elijah Muhammad died, that there was going to be some serious house cleaning that Malcolm X was going to do.
Okay, can I respond to that?
Please.
Okay, yeah. So you said you want to be specific, right? So I see what you're saying. You're being, extremely specific as far as the Nation of Islam in particular and what they're saying. And I get all that. I actually agree with all that. Like I said, I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam or anything like that. I'm not an Orthodox Muslim or anything. But my point is just, I was being a little bit less specific. I'm more so saying just, and I guess I shouldn't have used the Nation of Islam, if we're being that level of specific. What I'm saying, I guess the better way to say it would be, okay, let's practice, anything that is going to be positive, basically healthy eating, financial literacy, anything that, and okay, like I said, maybe Nation of Islam was a bad example to use. But I'm just trying to get people to quickly, sort of think of what I'm thinking of. And that's the general perception, although I understand what you're saying. And a lot of the reasons why that is why I'm not a part of that, organization or advocating, but I'm just saying that there's positive things we can do, basically, to put it simply. There's positive things that we can do that I do believe in, along with Brother Bag's point. And I do think we should do those things. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we should just leave here tomorrow and just, everything is, we can't do anything. Nobody is helpful. Nothing good is going on. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that in the end, all the ideas, no matter who they're being led by, we are not going to be allowed to build a sovereign nation or system within this particular system for sure. I don't think that it's likely we could do it in a lot of places, but definitely not within the system, because everything is really designed to make sure that that does not happen. And I'll just
when you say, I understand what you're saying about, you keep saying like another system. What I was referring to, and I'll give you an example. All throughout the United States, you have ghost towns, if you will. Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, bought a town for $2 million. There, 20 years ago, they had towns here where I'm from up for sale. You could literally go into a ghost town, buy it up, and put your own, if you're a Pan-Africanist or Black nationalist, you could use the system in this country and be around like-minded people. You see what I'm saying? You would control everything and you could build there. And that was my point as far as why don't we build something here like Black Wall Street? We could literally do it. We'd be around like-minded people. We wouldn't have to worry about violence from your Pookies and Ray Rays. Your kids could be safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that would.
I agree with you. I've talked about that before. And shout out to Brother Design for the super chat. Appreciate you, brother. And this is something I had a conversation with the Nation of Islam, a member of the Nation of Islam, about, one of the ministers. And he was talking about, I said, you all have been around for 92 years. You all have been preaching separation for 90 years. When are you going to make it happen? I said, you could very easily, you don't have to buy a town. You could go to an unincorporated part of a county, get a lawyer, get a bunch of signatures, and incorporate that, move there, start building, and then create a town. In fact, I said, this isn't far-fetched. This is what Mormons did. So most people may be unaware of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that they outlawed polygamy, what many people call sister wives. There were individuals in the Roman, not the Roman Catholic Church, but there were individuals in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that took umbrage with that, said, we're not giving up our sister wives. So they moved to southern Utah and northern Arizona and created their own towns, incorporated them, and they're the sheriff, they're the police officers, they're the police chief, they're the mayor. So this is not something that is far-fetched. In fact, this is how suburbs were created. White folk didn't want to live with Black people, around Black people, so they moved out the city, moved to unincorporated, undeveloped parts of the county, and created their own municipalities.
I kind of agree with Ghost a little bit more, because like I see what you're saying, but like, do we have any example of like Black people actually creating a 100% independent system underneath the system besides Black Wall Street? And we all know why that was possible, because we were segregated. So do you think that it's like, I'm not really seeing, like, I don't really see how that's like possible, because we're the main enemy. Like all these other groups are not really like enemies. Like they become allies or something. They're not really like, you know what I mean?
Well, you're talking about working with people that are like-minded, people that are Pan-Africanists. You're not talking about all Black people that don't share your ideology. As far as Africa would be great. The problem with Africa is the leaders don't want to stand up. So until they take the mindset of China, which said we will never be conquered again, look at the corruption in Africa. You can go there and build something, but I mean, it's on shaky grounds. Until they change, it's going to be difficult.
And
I mean, you could get people to invest in you in America, and all, because America's always a safe place to invest in. It's a stable government. That's why people like to come here and invest. That's why it's the largest tax haven in the world. So I feel that we are not taking advantage of this. And can it be done? Of course it can. I don't put handcuffs on myself or Black people with a positive mindset. I just refuse to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm just trying to think like also logically, because like you just said, for example, Pan-Africanism, that's probably gonna be what? Probably like 3% of the population if we all gonna unite, and then so 3% of the population is gonna go against this government, the most powerful military government right now currently. We're gonna go up against them by ourselves without having an outside. I don't see how that's like logically. Because
Well,
we
one,
are
you
the
don't
enemy.
have the mindset of going up against the government. It's not about going up against the government. It's about uplifting yourself. It's not about going to war. It's about creating a better life for you and your family.
Exactly, I agree with you. But you doing that, that's taken from their pockets. Because like this is basically a big America is a big corporation. So black folks, us doing that, we start building our own hospitals in America, start building our own infrastructure. We're basically taking out of their pocket. So that makes us automatically competition. It's just like in Africa right now. Africa, there's not one country in Africa that's 100% independent till this day. Because outsiders are still in control of everything. Because it's just very difficult. I feel like it might be easier to even happen in Africa. Because even Africa is going to be a great challenge trying to like become 100% independent in Africa. So I don't even see how we're going to do that outside of Africa if we can even do it in Africa where we have the largest population, we have the undeveloped lands. Like I agree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to think about the other side of it, like the.
Well, as far as America not benefiting, they would get taxes. And as far as business, everybody's going to get business because that's how America works. You look at the Asians or Chinese, they do business, but a lot of their products may come from other places. Even white people bring it in. They may not come into your town or whatever, but you're going to buy and ship in. So, I mean, when you're dealing with like our country, our world is globalized. So it's enough for everybody to get a piece, if you will.
Yeah, let me say something real quick if I can. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Bag, but the thing is, Big Kalon is saying, we have to exercise some level of, logic and
Exactly.
pragmatism when we're talking about these things as well. And I'm not trying to be defeatist and super negative, but it's just like you got to think about it. Like what you're saying, okay, you're going to benefit from tax revenue, so on and so forth, but if you look at it, don't you think they were benefiting in the past when they destroyed different movements or even in the present? I mean, the idea we are kind of set up as a permanent underclass, and the goal is to kind of keep us down here. If everything was just so easy and we could just, start our own communities and it was just that simple, then we obviously would have already done that. You know what I mean? It's not that simple. It's just the thing. And they will, find a way to destroy any attempts there. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try, but I'm just saying it seems like kind of cognitive dissonance to act like, oh, they won't, they'll just let us, start these towns and do everything and there won't be any resistance. Like, I don't see that being the case. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
what's
Bag.
your
Yeah,
opinion on
and
that?
Bag. I don't want you to think that I feel defeated because I'm all about nation building, 100%. I just want to think like more logical. You know what I mean? So we just don't build it up and it get burnt down. We have to like think about security, everything, just like they're doing. But that's all I digress.
Well, I think a contemporary example of that would be what Chokwe Lumumba Sr. and of course Jr. is now doing in Jackson, Mississippi. So of course, Chokwe Lumumba Sr. was a ardent, very vocal Pan-Africanist, right? And then of course we know that he moved to Jackson, Mississippi, ran for mayor, publicly running as a Pan-Africanist, right? And was successful. And then they started developing a Black power base in Jackson, Mississippi. So much so that it even attracted Deion Sanders to come and, of course, become the head coach at Jackson State University. So there are ways that this can take place. And I think, but here's the other thing I always talk about when, I think people are familiar with Star Wars. If you never watched Star Wars, you're familiar with the theme of Star Wars, right? And I always remember the second Star Wars movie is entitled what? The Empire Strikes Back. So whenever you throw a punch, you have to be ready for another punch to come back. And so I think we may not find situations in which we're looking at racial retrenchment in the manner we did 100 years ago, where they're just going to burn the whole town down. But it might be to try to undermine the leadership. It might be to try to undermine the industry. And we know in America, everything is based on competition, even though I think that's a bit of a lie because we know things have been set up in a manner which, affirmative action has historically in America has been white. But I think these are just issues that we have to be willing and ready to combat. And with Sister Shy, I would love for you to tap in, be part of the conversation. Sister Shy, we need some feminine energy in the conversation. So I'm gonna put the link in the chat, sister. Once again, you do not have to tap in. You don't have to cam up, but we'd love for you to tap in. And yes, we do know that in Jackson, Mississippi, they're having an issue with the water right now. Absolutely.
And how are we gonna like basically practice trade? You know what I mean, like import and export. How is that gonna be possible? So, like, do you think that this government is actually gonna give Black people a port so where they can actually be transferring goods?
If you're talking to me, I'm referring to building a town. Now, as far as the export, uh, that's something I'm not familiar with. When you're building a town, I mean, you can use anything to, like, I could order something from Africa and they can ship it over. So it's not like you're dealing with large corporations. You know what I mean? You're just a small town. So there's a big difference in a small town versus maybe, let's say, New York City that's going up against companies like Apple and things like that. So those
Right.
are really two different things. But the one thing about our situation as Black Americans, we're kind of really in a tough situation because we're not Africans from Africa. And over here in America, we get the short end of the stick. So you're either gonna get
Why are
screwed
you
by
not
America,
Africans though?
huh? What was
Why are you
that?
not Africans?
Why am I not African?
Yeah, you guys are
I'm an
Africans.
I'm an African American.
Yeah, but you actually have rights to Africa. Africa is literally your birthright. If you do your DNA test right now and your blood come from a certain
I
country, you
understand
get
that, but
rights
I
to that
can't.
country.
I cannot go there and be a citizen unless I go through a process. Here, I'm a citizen, and that's what I'm referring to. And what I was
Right.
saying is, you're either a victim of American policy here in this country, or you're going to be a victim of American foreign policy. So the African leadership really has to stand up for, I think, a large majority of the Black population to go there and do something. They're
But that's
very
the
weak.
problem. That's the
What?
problem. They can't stand up without us. And I don't think a lot of Africans in the diaspora understand what's actually going on in Africa right now. These leaders are puppets and they're literally selling out the continent every chance they get. They're
This
only
is
in
what
there
I'm
for
saying.
profits. So that's why we need it. We need the diaspora to also come to help with the capital because you guys have the capital. Your money goes a longer way in Africa than it would anywhere else. Africa is still undeveloped, you know what I mean? It's still like it got all the natural resources. That's why every other group is running to Africa right now as we speak. In the next 10 to 20 years, Africa is going to be a superpower. But the problem is we're not going to control nothing. Everybody's going to be running to Africa, but it's going to be the same issue because we're not going to control or own nothing. It's going to be owned and controlled by outsiders. Like right now, outsiders, they're controlling the leaders. They don't actually own the land. They're controlling the leaders. So like it's like a little complicated situation in Africa that needs the diaspora's help also for us to be able to overcome the system. I believe once Africa is truly independent and free, Black people anywhere you at in the world, you'll be good. We'll be safe. We'll have some type of security behind us.
But do the leaders in Africa really want the diaspora?
I mean,
Because
some yeah,
do
go
you
ahead.
know
I'm
what
gonna
I
let you
mean?
finish. Yeah, you're right. I mean, some of them don't because some of them actually, again, you already know they already bought. They're being
Yeah.
undermined. So, and that's why we need these. That's why we need most of these leaders outside. Like we need out. The whole government in Africa needs to be turned upside down because everything is corrupt right now. This is a whole bunch of puppets working. That's why even Africans in the continent, they're fighting and basically revolting against the leaders every other day. For example, in Sierra Leone, they ran the president out. He had to leave Sierra Leone because they want him out. But these leaders, they will not leave office. They stay in office for 60 years and pass it to their kids or their nephew or uncle. And that's the problem we're having in Africa right now.
Yeah. Well,
But
did Molly just find that the French are funding the a rebel group over there?
yep.
And that's what they do. They get one guy out, he gets in, and then they're
Mm-hmm.
quickly ready to fund another rebel group to keep
Mm-hmm.
destabilization there. So I mean,
Exactly.
how are you going to have a business and you possibly lose it and all your money's gone? At least in America, I mean, it's a little more stable. So the argument of if you build here in America, it's going to get turned down. You're going to have all this turmoil. That's the risk you take, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you you're making very valid points right now, and I don't have all the answers, but I feel like we should be working on trying to fix that problem because once that problem is fixed, everything else is going to fall in place. But if that problem is not fixed, we're just going to keep playing the same game. Like for example, look at Haiti. Haiti was independent, but what happened? Outsiders came undermining because Haiti didn't have no outside power. It was only Haiti. You know what I mean? We need to be unified. We need to be all connected to a common goal. we don't all have to agree, but I definitely agree with you though. Africa is like, it's gonna be a tough issue trying to like solve these problems in Africa.
Just real quick, Miss Sister Mary says she's too shy. But sister, you don't have to cam up, okay? And you can use a pseudonym, but we definitely need to get some feminine energy in the conversation.
Right.
You don't have to cam up. We'd love for you to get to be part of the conversation. We want a powerful sister's perspective. So please, please, please cam up.
And your question about Haiti, the interesting part about Haiti is those people came there with military hardware. How are they allowed to come there with military hardware? That's a failure on the Haitians' part for not checking.
I mean,
when they're coming in, you check these people, and they failed to do that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but it's also like a little flip side to that. The army, like the strength, they didn't have the same amount of numbers. You know, these Europeans, they were unified just to like basically conquer us and oppress us. And that's our problem. In Africa, it'd be a country that's literally beside the other country, and they will not help the other country become free. Like it's a whole bunch of, we're just super divided. The same thing in Africa, we're super divided, and that's our problem. I feel like once the Africans in diaspora, and this does not mean everybody in the diaspora has to go to Africa and run Africa. No, that's dumb. You know what I mean? But the wise mind, like the Pan-Africanists, the ones with capital, we should be going to Africa trying to build, because Africa is all about capital. They don't really care about the color stuff. It's more about capital. If you have the money to do something, yeah, it's gonna work. And I believe that most Black Americans, like, this might sound a little extreme, but I feel like another way of us like assimilating to Africa and getting citizenship and all of that will be like marriage. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I feel like that's another good option of, you know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just want to say, I think I'm actually optimistic about Pan-Africanism. I mean, I think that's obviously the most progressive thing to me. And then I'm actually optimistic about it because I think that even for a lot of the people that don't agree with that or don't subscribe to that or just aren't aware of it, like I think they're going to start coming around because you can already see, you know, you guys, you know, you're probably already aware of some of the like back and forth between, you know, FBA ideology versus Pan-Africanism or just non-continental Black Americans or whatever you call yourself. But the thing is, like, people are going to start to see eventually. I think we're waking up overall as Black people for sure. I do think that we are waking up about everything, just everything that is going on and has been going on. And eventually people are going to start to see, like, what is the most effective solution? Now, you guys are right. Bag, you're right. I mean, is everything perfect in Africa? Are we still going to face major challenges that could be, you know, a major impediment? Yeah, we will. But I would say the difference is we don't have people that hate us and are just constantly out to undermine us based on the color of our skin only. So you can blend in a lot more. There is an advantage to you bringing American dollars over there as well. So it's not a fail-proof solution, but I think you will have a better chance of, you know, now you have to get through the initial barriers. And that's why, like Bicolon, I would agree with that. I mean, it would be best if you can, you know, marry into some family or at least find some loyal friends. And that's going to be really hard to do. But if we focused on that, I think we have a chance. We have a better chance of trying to do something differently than what we've been doing the last, 50, 100 years in trying to recreate some, you know, sovereign nation somewhere, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't build in the meantime because we got to make money in the meantime. But yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. And if you look at the World Economic Forum and just looking at how the system in America is about to get worse, Black people are going to be absolute in the next 5 to 10 years. That's the whole plan America has for Black folks. They're going to keep marginalizing us to become a smaller group, and they're going to keep bringing all these white immigrants in, and Black people are going to become literally absolute. Your vote is not going to matter no more. So like all the power that you're going to have to even do anything politically is going to be basically invisible. So we don't have as much time as we think we do. And Africa will be recolonized in like next 20 years if we don't do something quick. So just looking at the numbers.
I don't want people to think. I hope I don't sound like I'm against Africa because
Oh no, no.
I am pro Africa, but I'm also pro America. I'm a firm believer that if going to Africa, the one thing you do not want to do is get rid of your American citizenship. I think
I
as
agree.
Pan-Africanists, it's going to be very important because when you do work on that in Africa and they do try to destabilize, and they will, if anything happens to you as an American, there's going to be pushback and drawback from America, people in America. But if you give up your citizenship, they're just going to look at it, oh, they're traitors, we don't care. But the one thing America hates is bad press, and it would be bad press if a bunch of them African Americans were over there trying to do something and then they were getting killed or hurt. You know what I mean? So that's very important for me to definitely want to keep your American citizenship if going over there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. For example, I have 2 passports, and I'm working on getting a third one. You can never have too many passports. The wealthiest people in America, they have multiple passports. They don't even make their money in America. I don't even think we realize that the wealthiest people in America don't only make their money most of their money come outside of America. But I definitely agree with you though. It's definitely good to have that American passport. Your American passport gives you a lot of privileges, especially going to Africa. With that blue passport, you can do a lot of things. So I definitely agree with that.
Sister Mary Schaub, tap in, sister.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, Hi, everyone.
Peace, peace.
Peace.
Hey.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to chime in because I'm a dual citizen. I have of course, I'm a U.S. citizen and I'm a Sierra Leone citizen, and I just think um I just me personally, I'd rather return back to the motherland because I mean, just look at the history of Black people in this country. Like, I mean, we have been through a lot, and I just don't think building here, I just don't think it will be a good idea because of the past history. And then just look, they don't even want to give us reparations. Like, I mean, I don't know. I just don't think it's safe for us to build here. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Does anyone have a rebuttal for her?
Well, when I was referring to building, I was referring to there's going to be Americans that do not go to Africa that are Pan-Africanist minded, Black minded, pro-Black, however you want to classify it. And I'm thinking of a place that like-minded people can build. Okay, now Africa works for you and that's great, but not everybody's going to go. And that's where my mindset was for people that don't want to go to Africa. There could be a place for them. I have no problem. My plans are, after I retire is to look into Africa to see if it works, to see if I can do it. You know, I know you have to make connections, but I'd like to have that opportunity because I don't see America being around. I mean, it's getting to the point now
Exactly.
where there's going to be not necessarily a civil war, but vigilante justice going on.
That's
I
already
mean,
taking place, but it typically takes place against us.
Right.
exactly, exactly. And I
Yeah.
see it coming. I see it coming, and I mean, you say it's here. I mean, I see it on a larger scale. You
Hmm.
know, so
And I don't
that's
think
all.
that.
Go
No,
ahead.
you go ahead, brother. You can go ahead, brother.
Oh no, I'm finished.
All right. And I don't think that every single African in the diaspora has to go to Africa. I feel like that's not really like logical. I feel like we just have to be connected to Africa. You know what I mean? Like Africa should be the base for our liberation. It should be the base. That don't mean that we all have to just be in this one continent because that's not really logical. I feel like we're global people. We can still be global, but we have to have that connection with Africa and build those relationships. I feel like that's the key.
Understood, understood.
Yeah. And I want
So
to add too to the one sister because I'm also Sierra Leonean, and I have my passport also. And I feel like it comes with so much benefits. Like, for example, my mom right now, she's in America, but she goes to Sierra Leone. She owns property in Sierra Leone, an Airbnb, and she's making way more money off her investments in Africa than she ever would in America. Like, she like buying a house in America is just the system in America. I feel like it's just way better than Africa. For example, in Africa, you can go buy a house with no credit check. You don't need no credit check. You can buy a house for $2,000, $1,500. You can buy a nice piece of land. You know, I feel like we just have more. We have more freedom in Africa, I believe. Even though Africa, I'm not saying Africa is perfect because it's far from perfect, but we just have more freedom in there, I believe.
And yes, I agree with that. That's what I was saying. I feel like we have more freedom in the motherland. Um, but yeah, that's what I agree with. Big Bigelin. I think that's how you
Big
pronounce
alarm.
your name. Okay, sorry for
No, you're fine.
messing up your name.
Professor Lumumba, how do you feel about it? Like, what do you think is the best solution right now to
So
our problem?
my thoughts are we have to be connected, and most people know I am a Pan-Africanist, right? So I think it's twofold. I think one, we have to build institutions on both sides of the Atlantic. And then secondly, we have to have initiatives and organizations that facilitate, of course, us working together. And we see this in other communities. We see this in Asian American communities, Arab American communities. We see this even in Latino communities as well, to where they're connected with their brothers and sisters who are, of course, back home. And I think we have to do the same thing here. For many people, I know that they are doing that. But I do think, and this is maybe but a big Quillan is going to take umbrage with this, but in order to do all of these things that we're talking about, we're going to have to be engaged in some type of industry that we control or have a sizable market share of, right? So, and I say this because we hear this whole concept of the poor righteous teacher, and I take umbrage with that because you can't get anything done if you don't have any type of capital. Number one, right? And so with that being said, I think we do have to promote Black people making money, because the reality situation, I think not doing so is rooted in poverty, in a poverty mindset.
I agree. But I feel like it's just like, I definitely agree with that. It's just a thin line between that, because we do have we have a lot of billionaires in Africa, a lot of billionaires in America, millionaires, but it's not much really being done. Like, most of the billionaires we have in Africa are just selling out the continent. Most of the wealthiest people in Africa, they're literally working within the government.
And I understand that, and that tends to be the same throughout the world, right? People typically enter into politics for two reasons: either to protect their wealth or to become wealthy. This is a reality, right?
Thanks.
So, I understand that, but the reality of the situation is I would rather have someone who is wealthy or has resources or controls industry and look to convert them or get them to see the benefits of engaging in a Pan-Africanist type of mindset to the benefit of our people as a whole, rather than trying to convert or convince someone who doesn't have anything to offer.
That's true.
I'm just being honest with you. Like, listen, we need to get some people that got some things going for themselves.
That's true. All right. If we had Jay-Z and Kanye on a Pan-African movement right now, that could do so much, especially in the capital in Africa. Oh my God.
Yeah, I disagree.
For example,
I disagree just because the music. I mean, first and foremost.
But that was my point. For example, the music industry, Black people should control the music industry globally. Because, for example, we have this whole Afrobeat.
Well, I think what we would have to do is control the genres that we predominate.
Yeah.
Right. We couldn't just control the whole music industry. I mean, what we look like controlling country music. You know what I'm saying? Fuck out of here,
but
right?
you know what's crazy? All of those music comes from us. Like, even country music. We was the first one that was actually doing country music.
I'm saying I think what would be logical is if we control the genres that we actually predominate. But with that being said, unfortunately, we know that for most in the music industry, they viewed hip hop as a genre of music that was simply a fad, particularly like disco music, right? But it stuck around and now is $1 billion industry. So, but the issue, in my opinion, has to be in controlling industry.
The part where getting capital from the people you referred to, all these people to me seem too integrated to where they're not going to want to get involved with Pan-Africanist anything for fear of being blackballed, canceled. So,
and that's the problem with black capitalism, and that's the point I keep trying to like stress. Anybody that becomes rich off the system is not going to change their whole mindset and all of a sudden become a revolutionary. And that's the problem. Is like, how do we fix that? Like, I guess the education, but
well, actually, they could do it because white people have done it. They've made their money off capitalism, then went into foundations and funneled their money into different organizations that were against their party lines. Like we had Republicans do things for Democratic parties to create division. I mean, I don't see what the problem is that they're having. I mean, to help a black person rise up is not a bad thing. But if you mention the word Pan-Africanist, oh, you're a racist and you want to kill white people, blah, 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 you know? So, yeah, I think it's more of an education in how they present it, you know? But it could work.
Somebody come in and say, control the NBA. That's going to be tough.
Well, and so part of the issue is, and we can talk about the music industry. We know that Michael Jackson, right, tried to control a large part of the industry. We saw what happened to him. Same with Prince. So this tends to be an issue that, unfortunately, like I stated, whenever there has been a real or even perceived racial progress on the behalf of Black people, it's followed by a period of racial retrenchment. But I think one of the reasons why that took place was because they were individuals trying to engage in these acts rather than a group, right?
Right.
So I think that's something that we have to look at as well. But I think the major issue, of course, is, and just bringing this full circle back to the conversation we were having about the three main Black political ideologies, I think there has to be a marrying of the three approaches. And so what I mean by that is, from an integration standpoint, yes, we should be advocating that we would have the full benefit of our so-called rights as American citizens. From a Black nationalist standpoint, we should be engaging in racial pride. We should be advocating racial uplift, building Black institutions, right? But then even from a conservative standpoint, we should, of course, be focusing in part of our movement, for lack of better words, on a push for what? Self-help and, of course, economic development.
I agree.
So in my opinion, there should be, hey, I'm saying the brother misspelled my name. There should be
that was a spell check, autocorrect. I don't know what that was.
There should be a marrying of the three approaches.
How do you think we do that? Because it seems like the conservatives don't want to have nothing to do with the Democrats, and the Democrats is like, I don't even know how we do that.
Well, so here's the thing, right? When you do what we talking, that's wrestling. All that is smoke and mirrors, right? Oh, they're going back and forth with these different talking points. As we know, both political parties are funded by the same special interest groups and lobbyists. Right. So what we have to do is get with people who are serious, not individuals who are looking to be on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, but individuals who are serious about doing work in the community when the smoke and mirrors are gone and the cameras are off, right? And so that's going to partake in people engaging in actual work that's going to be beneficial to the community rather than promoting liberal or conservative talking points. With that being said, we also have to understand that anyone who, in my opinion, aligns themselves with a particular political party is not truly invested in what? Black empowerment. They are invested in a particular political party's empowerment. For example, we hear people on the left and the right saying we got to vote for this person because of this, vote for this person because of that. Oh, they don't promote conservative values. But the reality of the situation is any political candidate that is a member of the Republican Party or Democratic Party, their campaign is being financed by those two parties, and as a result, they are going to be what? Beholden to those political parties rather than the very constituents that they want to vote for them.
Exactly. All these politicians already bought. That's why I feel like us like trying to like pick one of these parties. We're just wasting our time. We're basically just playing games with ourselves because it's like none of these parties are actually going to give us real liberation. It's going to take us to like gain liberation. We can't really expect no outside group or no other group to come and save us. That's why I don't really agree with the whole. And that's the reason I had a problem with the other brother, the one I was talking to you about. It's because like he just keeps pushing this whole Republican thing, and it's like I don't think that's like going to save black people. Us voting Republican is not going to save us at all.
Got you. And I mean, and that's understandable. I think it's the same thing as black people trying to say vote Democrat, right?
Exactly.
I think, and I always tell people that if, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, so of course you could push back, you don't have to agree, that anyone who is invested in black empowerment at home or abroad would be advocating for what? A black person to be politically independent.
I agree. No, I agree with that.
Candidate by candidate, issue by issue basis. Sister Shy, I see you unmuted yourself.
Oh, I was gonna say, I agree. And I last presidential election, I voted independent. But
Okay. So
I
did
agree.
I.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think us voting Republican or Democrat, it's not going to save us. I think us practicing group economics and just circulating the dollar in our community. I think that's what's going to help us. Not voting Republican or Democrat. I'm sorry, that's just my opinion.
Understood.
Agree.
King of Kings, I appreciate you tapping in, brother. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Once again, you don't have to cam up. I like your logo, but you don't have to cam up. You can come in, tap in, be part of the conversation. So yes, I think Sister Shy, that's a great example. I remember I was on another brother's platform and they were talking about Trump. And I said, well, just be honest. He was in for 4 years. And what did he do specifically for black people? Nothing. They talked about he wanted to build the wall. But I said, that doesn't help necessarily African Americans. They're building the wall because they have an issue with Latinos coming into the country, right? But they don't have an issue with white folk coming into the country, right? So once again, this isn't actually helping us, right? They talked about, well, he put into law the criminal justice reform, and I said that's great, but I said number one, criminal justice reform doesn't, in my opinion, really help black people because not all black people are criminals, right? And the second issue is, some folk need to be locked up. I mean, we just gotta keep it a buck.
Yeah.
Some folks need to be locked up. So I mean, how does that help me if you got somebody who's a criminal back out on the street and I got kids? That don't benefit my community any.
What would you say to the whole Donald Trump offered the black community $500 million or something like that? What would you say to that argument?
Well, I would have to look at how it would be disseminated, right? Like I said, the devil is always in the details, right? So it's almost like if you win the lottery. Oh, I won $26 million. By the time you get done with it, it's they cut that thing in half, and you got about 12 million. Right. And then there's a way that you get it. So I think that would play a role. Right. And the reason why I say that is many people would say, well, when you look at Africa and America gives Africa aid, right? But oftentimes America will give Africa aid in a manner that's beneficial to America and not to Africa. So this is what we like to call interest convergence, which is one of the core tenets of critical race theory. And I'm going to do another show on critical race theory as well. And what we tend to find is, guess what? America would give an African nation $10 million in aid. But that African nation can only spend that money with American companies.
Facts.
So how does it actually benefit? It only benefits America. You see what I'm saying? So, okay, this is the amount of money. How is it being used? What are the parameters around how it can be spent? What initiative or institutions is it going to build and develop? You have to look at all of that, not just the surface level.
I agree. And I feel like that's one of our biggest problems globally. Like, we're all waiting to be saved, even in Africa right now. So they ran away to the Mali, they ran away to French people or whatever, but now they asking basically for Russia or China to basically come and be the new oppressor. And I feel like that's our problem globally. Like, we keep looking for outsiders to come and save us when it just takes us working together That's
Well,
all it takes is us working together and putting our
and
minds
I
together.
think, and I think
Yeah,
one of the
exactly.
my bad, Sister Shy, go right ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. You could go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, come on, sister. You tapped in, and so I'm gonna make sure that you are given the floor.
Right.
Well, I was just saying. Oh gosh, I lost my, I lost what I was gonna say, but it's okay. I'll just tap back in when I remember.
Got you. So what I was going to say to that is one of the issues that we find why so many people argue why are we finding African people throughout the world in Europe, on the continent, in Polynesia, in Australia, in South America, the Caribbean, North America, engaging in this mindset in which we're looking for others, depending on the largesse of others to what benefit ourselves. And I think there's a number of issues. One, I've always made the argument that particularly in American education and even Eurocentric education, it promotes this concept and idea of Black people being integrationalists, right? We know particularly in America, we only learn about African or African-American heroes that were willing to work with white folk, right?
Facts.
So we're talking about one, we're talking about, of course, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We're talking about one, Frederick Douglass, right? So we only learned about individuals that were seen as less threatening by the white power structure, right? The second issue comes down to what Dr. Carter G. Woodson calls miseducation, right? And he argues in his seminal text that was written 89 years ago in 1933 that the crux of the issue, the seat of the problem, as he calls it, is that when we go to school, and he states that even oftentimes in the Black schools, we're taught to what? Uphold the culture, history, and heritage of everyone else and to abhor our own. And so education plays a role. And so education plays a role in us, unfortunately, not having faith, not having a money in African self-determination, irrespective of where we are in the world. And I would argue that that was one of the major issues that we find why we are not progressing in the manner that I believe we should. I was having a conversation with a sister earlier, and she said, well, what about having faith that, somehow things would just come to fruition? I said, well, sister, I've been living in this world long enough to know that's not how things work. Things don't come to fruition unless you put it into fruition, right? So you're going to be hoping and wishing for another 100 years unless we get off our knees, stop praying, and do things for ourselves. And so I think that's one of the major issues. I think one of the particular issues we find that inhibits this idea that we like to call nation building is the fact that we have been socialized, and some would even argue indoctrinated in the mindset that we have to depend not only on others, but oftentimes in the supernatural to solve our problems. And this is why we know that when Marcus Garvey, unfortunately, was deported from America, and his ideological son, let me cam up again. His ideological son, Carlos Cooks, of course, became the leader of the Garvey movement. And he changed Garvey's motto of one God, one aim, one destiny to one goal, one aim, one cause, one aim, one destiny. Many people took umbrage with this, and they wrote to Mr. Garvey while he was in London. And what ended up taking place? Garvey wrote to Carlos Cooks. Once again, he was his ideological son. Carlos Cooks created the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement. We know that he was from the DR, but he had no confusion about who he was as an African man here in the Western world. And what ended up taking place was Garvey wrote to Carlos Cooks and said, hey, they told me you removed God from the movement, God from the motto. Carlos Cooks said, yes, I did. Garvey said, good job. He told him, good job. Right. He said, good job. I wish I would have known to do that 10, 12 years ago. And we also know, right, and I'm getting on my soapbox here, right, my bully pulpit, that unfortunately, when many of our people align themselves with a particular religion or they say that they're a person of faith, what do we tend to find? Many of our people, because we've been so indoctrinated, we find it hard to then question that individual, to hold that individual accountable, because they create this aura and this mindset and this mantra that if you're questioning me, you're questioning God's will. So as Dr. Amos Wilson taught us in his book, Blueprint for Black Power, whenever you're doing anything in any way, shape, or form that's rooted in what Black empowerment, you should not have anyone in charge that has any affiliation with any kind of religion whatsoever, because they would use that as a way to manipulate people and not be held accountable for their actions.
Oh my God, I agree 100%. That's exactly what's happening right now in Africa. I'm gonna let the sisters.
Yeah, and I agree. I think all Black people, we should put our religion to the side and work together, practice group economics, and I feel like that would help us because we always put our religion first. And I'm sorry, but where has that gotten us? It hasn't gotten us nowhere. So I just
Right.
think put your
Well,
religion to the side. Oh,
well, sister,
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna play white devil's advocate real quick, and I'm going to argue that it has helped. Praying helped you get through the Holocaust of enslavement. Having hope helped Black codes. Having hope and believing in God's everlasting hand helped you get through Jim Crow. How could you say that? And as a result of believing in God, look, you have mega churches. How could you make such a claim?
I'm sorry.
I can't help but
I'm
laugh neither.
sorry.
You have mega churches.
Okay.
You have a
Well,
large white Jesus in the sanctuary, right? You have a purpose of getting up every Saturday or Sunday morning and going and worshiping the one true God that was forced upon you during the Holocaust of enslavement, and of course, during the Ma'afa of colonialism, imperialism, racism, and slavery. How could you say such a thing? If it wasn't for God, if it wasn't for Jesus, if it wasn't for Allah, if it wasn't for Jehovah or Yahweh, you wouldn't be here today. How could you say such a thing?
I mean, I guess you're right, but like we
I
still
disagree.
we still put religion first, and I still don't think that's really helping us. Like, I think we need to be like African first and then practice group economics, and I feel like that would get us somewhere, like how the Jews do. Like, and
Well, sister, I'm going to say
I don't
this.
know. I just
I was being facetious, but
oh
I made that claim because any of us that are doing the work, the real work, right? You could be building institutions, you could be creating initiatives, you could be creating connections on the continent, you could be bringing Black people to get better together, you could be stopping the violence, you could be picking up trash in the community. Someone's going to come to you with the very irrational, illogical soliloquy that I just provided with to you, and you got to be prepared for that. And so I would argue, no. So if someone said that to me, I would say, well, brother, I disagree. I think history shows that we didn't have to rely on God or Allah or any other divine figure to liberate ourselves. But through diligent work and struggle, we liberated ourselves, and we're still trying to liberate ourselves.
You took my answer.
And I would also state that all of the different religions and deities that you've named, all of these religions practice a form of historical, theological, and of course, cultural anti-Blackness.
Facts. And it's all false. It's just a whole bunch of
it's mythology. In fact, my daughter and
mythology
my last weekend we were going over mythology. What is mythology, right? And so I just let her know these things. So but the reason why I stated that to you, though, sister, is because someone's going to come at you that way, and you got to be ready for it.
okay, yeah, I understand, and thank you for that.
No problem.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah, but I was just saying.
Because I actually did a show on my channel maybe about a year ago when I talked about why is religion important. So I tell people, if you're going to be unapologetically African, if you're going to be what we like to call Black-minded, right? Well, then it would be hypocritical for you to then practice an alien religion. Right. So, and of course, when I was part of the CAU, the Coalition of African Unity, one of the things that we promoted was being self-determining in all aspects of life, not just some, but all. So we were talking about financially, we were talking about in terms of religion and spirituality, we were talking about in terms of culture, the music we listen to, the whole nine. We wanted to be self-determining in all areas of human activity, not just some.
Right. They just use religion to gain political power, like the late Professor John Henry Clark always stated. Oppressors, they use religion to gain power and control. That's all they did.
Yeah, I mean,
they mentally enslave us.
Even Napoleon said religion is what keeps the poor from killing the rich. So
right. You know what's crazy? This whole conversation, I realized the solution really is education, though. we have to build infrastructures to like educate the next generation. We shouldn't just solely focus on our, like ourselves. Like we should be focusing on the next generation, because most of the stuff that's going to happen, we most likely will not be alive to even witness what's going to happen. But we have to build a foundation for the next generation so they can keep the torch going on. I feel like education really is the start. Knowledge itself, you know what I mean? Building infrastructures like institutions with our own with African-centered education. You know what I mean? Afrocentric education and not Eurocentric. Because in Africa right now, all the curriculums in every school is Eurocentric, and that's one of the biggest problems. Everybody in Africa feel like they made it when they come to America. Basically, if I'm educated in America, then I'm educated. So
And,
like one of
and
our
part of the
biggest
reason for that
problems.
is, of course, and I can say this about working higher education, that the of the 300 highest ranked universities in the world, 200 of them are in the United States of America. That's a reality. So part of it is just a sheer numbers game that, hey, the most prestigious, well-known higher education institutions in the world are in the United States.
I agree.
But I would argue it's not always where you get the education, but it's what you do with it. Right? Because if you want to give an example, we've had brothers who were educated at Morehouse and turned out to be enemies of their own people.
Right.
Because
it's Eurocentric.
So I would argue, well, not even always Eurocentric. Sometimes the individuals, they're not about that life, right? But what it really comes down to is, what do you do with the education that you receive?
Right. That's a good point. You're right.
Appreciate you, brother Ghost. Because, like I said, I've been in, I work in higher ed, so typically now you have a number of counter spaces. There are numerous classes that you can take to learn about different perspectives, and you have some individuals that make up their mind and say, "My goal is to align myself with white power." I can recall when I was in undergrad, there was a brother who he started like public speaking, right? And I'm not going to go into what he talked about or if he was good or not, but he created like a brand where he was a public speaker. And there was a number of racial incidents that took place on campus. He ended up, I do not work at a HBCU, I work at a HWI. But I have worked at a HBCU before. But what ended up taking place was he was interviewed and he said, "But I haven't seen any issues." And one of my mentors said that's because he's trying to ingratiate himself with white folk that have money. Right. So sometimes it's not even education. Sometimes it's the person's individual worldview.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think what do you think it is? Like, because I do believe like if we had institutions that was African-centered education, I mean, it's always going to be sellouts and collaborators, but I feel like most, like the masses would be more conscious. Because I feel like once you understand what's going on, how the world is run, how the European came to power, it's hard for you not to, you know what I mean, want to like help your people gain liberation. Well, for me personally, but
yeah, or unless you go home to a household that's full of Negroes. And I'm just being honest. Like I said, I work in higher ed. So I see this where the student comes to college, they're taking history courses, they're taking Black studies courses, they're taking courses on sociology, right? And they're learning certain things. But when they go home, the family or the parents are like, "What? You read what? You think what? Nah, you got to get up out of here." So then guess what? They acquiesce to the pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
And then another thing is too, if you want to make money, you kind of have to like work within the system to somewhere if you want to make money in this system. So I feel like that's why most people do it also.
I disagree. And I disagree. I think, so I know several brothers who are Black-minded, who are Pan-Africanist, and they work in corporate America and make good money, and they have not compromised their values. In fact, I'm still working with the brother because we have to schedule him coming on, and we're going to actually do a live interview where I talk with him about that. I know plenty of brothers who work in corporate America who are extremely Black-minded, Pan-Africanist in origin, and they make good money, and they have not compromised their values.
So basically, these other sellouts are just Negro opinions, basically.
Yeah, because here's the reality of the situation. Brother Ghost, I'm gonna have you tap in a minute. So let me just say this, and I'm gonna have you emphasize, what you're saying here. But what tends to happen is, in my personal opinion, This is America. So America is a pluralistic society. So you're always going to come in contact with people and to work with people whose values and views are different than yours. That's just the reality because we live in a pluralistic society. But there are some individuals that believe that if they adopt particular values, that somehow they would get further ahead. And then you have some individuals who stay true to themselves. Like, for example, I use feminism, for example. I would use women, for example, in the workplace. We know women, unfortunately, particularly if women are particularly attractive, face sexism in the workplace. We also know that oftentimes there are sisters who are pressured to or even believe that the way for me to make it professionally is to sleep my way up the ladder. But then you have some women who say, I'm not willing to do that. I don't have to sleep my way up the ladder. I'm going to let my merits, my work speak for me, and then I'm going to progress that way. So we find it both ways. Brother Ghost, and then I'm hopefully Brother Back can tap back in, and he can of course elaborate on the point he made. And then I'm gonna have Sister Shy tap in because I want to see if she can speak to what I just spoke of as well in terms of the female dynamic. But Brother Ghost, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, and we might have to just agree to disagree on that at the end of the day. But I do think that it is important to point out that, especially as far as like corporate America, it's interesting that you mentioned that one. But as somebody that works in that, and I've just worked in other industries where it could be pretty tough. And I think that it is important to be honest about that. And there's levels to it too. Are you like extremely overt? Is everybody kind of aware of who you are? Are you showing up with a dashiki? And there's different levels to it. But I do think, to be honest, like it is pretty hard. The society is kind of set up to, with that sort of almost house Negro, field Negro type of setup. So it's like it could be tough in certain industries, especially in corporate America. If you're and it varies by region as well. Obviously, your experience is going to be different, maybe in like Atlanta or something, where you might be still working around a lot of Black people versus if you're working in another part of corporate America, different part of the country. But I think it can be difficult. But like you said, I mean, I do think, yeah, there's going to be some people that can do things a certain way, and maybe they have enough credentials and a strong enough resume, or they're willing to lose jobs or whatever the case may be. But I do think that it could be tough depending on how overt you are in the environment you're in. Now, what I will say is like, okay, yeah, I don't compromise my integrity or values as much as possible in any situation, and I will leave a job for that if it comes up. I will lose friends, I'll do whatever, but that's me. Most people are not like that, and I even have Black people that look at me all the time and say things to me like, oh, why you do this, why you do that, or you should do this, you should do that. I'm just like, whatever, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. But I have definitely not progressed as far as if I was to compromise some of my values in the way that I go about things. I know that I would be further if I did do that, if I chose to move a different way. So,
Understood. And Sister Mary, she says she works in Worthington, Ohio. I used to live in Worthington, sister, so we got to connect 100%. Make sure you reach out to me because I used to live in Worthington. So I definitely understand what you're talking about. Sister Shy, you may be speaking of racial battle fatigue, which is what many Black people face when they're working in a hostile, racially hostile environment. I did a show a couple of weeks back on racial battle fatigue. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. And of course, before I worked in higher education, I was in the military. So that tends to be an extremely racist and sexist environment as well. So definitely know where you're coming from. I unfortunately, I'm one of those lepers that shows my spots, right? So I say unfortunately because many people would argue that prohibits me from being able to move forward in my career. But I don't think so. I think part of it is that you could be yourself, you could be unapologetically African, but I think there's a way you go about it in which, at least in the workplace, you're not coming off as adversarial or always trying to be contrarian, right? And so that's a conversation I've been blessed to have with numerous mentors that I've had, male and female, that listen, you could be unapologetically who you are, but you also need to know how to be collegial in whatever environment that you are in. But I will say that working in higher education, it tends to be a push for people to be more open-minded and willing to accept people who are different from them rather than other industries that people work in. So I think that's the caveat as well.
Yeah, that's a very important caveat and point.
Yes,
And I
sir.
was going to say that. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
actually said that yourself.
Full disclosure, right? Yeah, I'm not fooled. I know how that works. Absolutely. Yeah,
No, I
I
know
work
you're
in the
not. Yeah.
industry where that tends to be accepted and pushed, right? And oftentimes, many people argue they're trying to get people to accept things that I think are nonsensical, but that's a conversation for another day, right? But the fact that I work in that type of industry, that it even gives me a bit of a space to be very radical. And I might even do a show from my office on campus, but if you go into my office, right, it looks like a shrine to Pan-Africanism, like literally. my office looks like a damn museum, you know what I mean? So there's a more of a space for that, because of course, if they say, hey, you can't have this here, it could be seen as, hey, you're being discriminatory, because, you know, if you go to the women's center, if you go into a woman's office who is a feminist, or so on and so forth, for LGBTQ activists, they're going to have flags up the whole nine. So I work in the industry and where there's more space given to allow that type of outward expression of my personhood, my person, and of course my values.
Right. Yeah, no, and that definitely factors in. But that's okay. I mean, like I said, it's just good that you pointed that out for people that are not necessarily aware, or, would need to hear it, because like I said, I do think it is an issue. I mean, we pretty much covered all of it, all the aspects of it, I think. But yeah, it can just be tough. But like I said, I'm not an advocate of compromising your values or your integrity or anything like that, because that is, of course, the only way that we're gonna kind of force the change. At least the way that I see it, we have to show, especially as men, I would say we have to show who we are and not kind of hide it, in order to make people see that we're not just going to go along with anything that they put out there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So last thoughts, because we're about to close out. Last thoughts.
Man, I mean, great show. I appreciate everybody else's opinions that they offered. And I just want to say too, I think that it's kind of funny. It's like me and Bag, I feel like we were, kind of like we're kind of pessimistic on two different viewpoints. Like I'm kind of pessimistic and cynical on the, building America and strictly, black nationalism in America. And I think I have good reason. I think we all would have good reason. But I think that I'm kind of a little guilty of maybe being a little too pessimistic on that end. And I think he might be a little bit, too pessimistic on the African end, because I think that although some of those issues are legitimate that all of us covered and that we all know about, like I said, I think that's still the best chance. And the realities too, I think, and I haven't unfortunately been to Africa. I'm trying to get there as soon as I can. I do have a passport. But I think that we got to be conscious of not taking in too much of this negative propaganda. Like I do think things are better on that continent than we think. And there's 54 countries, and we got to be careful to not get too caught up in the propaganda and some of the negative thinking. And also remember that we have a lot more dollars, and we can just go in as visitors and do things. So we're not necessarily going to be subject to the same thing. So it's kind of like the opposite of how we say immigrants are coming over here benefiting off of our hard work and stuff and dealing with challenges that they don't have to deal with. Like we can basically benefit from some of the same things. And I'm not saying like go in with that mentality of like take all their resources and
Absolutely.
colonize the country. But what I am saying is that we're not necessarily, when I go over there, they don't know what tribe I am. Well, I mean, they might think they do, but they don't know, really, and I don't know either. So we're not dealing with like some of these conflicts as much. And like I said, there's 54 countries, so you don't have to choose the most war-torn country with, clear corruption. You can go somewhere and try to build something where at least you have a chance of, like I said, nobody destroying you solely based on your race or skin color. Most likely, that won't happen. Obviously, things can happen anywhere, but for the most part, you have a better chance of that. Whereas here, that there will be some sort of opposition if you're being honest. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, I just think we both, we could both be a little bit more optimistic about opposing views. But I definitely think it's something to be conscious of, to at least give the whole overall Pan-Africanism thing more of a chance than what I think people are giving it, because there's a lot of negativity and propaganda, but we got to understand, where is that coming from? Like, is that actually coming from Africans, or is that mostly just coming from, like, you know, American media and European owned media and things like that? But overall, great show. I also appreciate you stating your opinion on what you think is best. And I agree with that. You know, I know sometimes, you know, you check me on certain things that I like say, and you know, because I just I don't get too into like any of these real ideologies like that for the most part. Because like I said, like, if it's not really, if I can't see the benefit for like Black people specifically, then I don't really get too deep into it. I'm just looking at what can we use to help us. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And you know,
so
that's one of the things that Dr. Amos Wilson talked about. He says sometimes we become so rigid and stuck in ideology. And what he argues is that whatever is beneficial to African people, that is engaging in African-centered behavior. This is the argument that he makes. And the argument he makes is that, why? Because we have to be fluid, not what? Rigid. We have to be fluid if we're going to be successful. So as Bruce Lee said, like water, right? So until next time, y'all, appreciate everyone for tapping in. Make sure you tap in next time. Peace.